Okay, so we're going to get started here. First of all, a big, huge, warm welcome to everybody for attending this webinar hosted by the M&E Accountability and Technical Learning Lab. And we're welcoming you to today's webinar, which is on the Community Feedback and Response Mechanism, CFRM. We're glad you could join us. This is actually the second part of a two-part series on accountability. In this webinar, some of my colleagues from the Learning Lab are going to go through a short training on CFRM, basing the training off of the ADRA CFRM guide, our official CFRM guide, which I encourage you to take a look at if you haven't already. Which, by the way, my name is David Kazarchuk. I'm the Associate Director for Development Programs at ADRA Canada. So I'm joining you from the great country of Canada. After we have our short training on the CFRM guide, ADRA CFRM guide, we're going to have 4 case studies presented by some other members of the ADRA Network, which I'll be introducing to you to shortly. And then lastly, at the end, we're going to have a short question and answer session. Now, we only have an hour and a half for our webinar this morning. So please keep that in mind as we're going through our session today, that we may get to your question, we may not get to your question, but we will do our best given the time that we have. We are actually in the process of recording this webinar now, and we will send you a copy of the recording as well as the PowerPoint to you afterwards, as long as you've gone through the webinar, through the sign-up process. As you have questions, you're able to type them into the chat. You can find the chat at the bottom of your screen. We will be noting any questions, and we will be answering during the Q&A session that is at the end of our session today. Our friend Liliana will be monitoring the chat. So if there's any support that you need, have any problems with the sound or the video or the presentation, please reach out to Liliana and she will get back to you. We also have some translation this morning, or this afternoon or this evening, wherever you're joining us from, that will be given to us by Nestor, who will be translating in Spanish only. I realize that we also advertised that there would be French translation, but unfortunately our French translator was unable to make it today, so there will be no French translation today. Okay, so with that all out of the way, I'm going to introduce you to our presenters. So for the CFRM session, the CFRM training, we have 2 presenters. The first will be Daria Markek. She is the Programs Officer from ADRA UK. And then we will have Carrie Mao, who is the MEAL Technical Assistant at ADRA International. After the presentation on the CFRM training and the CFRM policy, we will have our case studies presented by Christine Lamau, who was joining us from ADRA Fiji as the Senior Project Manager. We will then have Kabir Sapit from ADRA Nepal, who is the Acting Team Leader for Livelihoods. We'll then have Josfat Kuria Uriapo from ADRA Zimbabwe, who is a MEAL coordinator. And then lastly, we will have Harriet Tongyewe, who is the MEAL manager at ADRA Uganda. Okay, and with all that out of the way, I'll now hand it over to Daria and Carrie. Welcome again to our webinar on CFRM.
Thanks so much, David. And with that, let's get started. So a few months ago, we asked you all a series of questions as we started planning for this webinar. And we found that even though almost half of the respondents were aware of the CFRM guide, over half of those respondents had never used it for their programming, which was actually really useful for us as we planned for this webinar. And based on these responses and other answers throughout the survey, It really helped us shape our webinar today. And we wanted to thank all of you who took the time to respond to that survey. So with that, let's move on. Now, some of you are probably very familiar with MEAL. And again, MEAL stands for Monitoring, Evaluation, Accountability, and Learning. And we're going to focus on the A in MEAL, on accountability. And accountability is essential to the MEAL process because it helps us improve the quality and the relevance of programming. And a reminder that MEAL replaces M&E in our ADRA network. Now we have our first poll question that's going to pop up. Daria will launch that for us right now. And the poll says, are you aware of ADRA's accountability guidelines? Yes or no? So you should see that pop up on your screen. So just click yes or no. And while you are answering that, we will be highlighting just really quickly ADRA's 5 guiding principles, which can be found in the AAP guidelines or accountability to affected populations. These were developed by the MEAL TLL from the original existing accountability framework. And it's reflected in the new suite of safeguarding policies and also in the MEAL policy. And we do have a webinar recording of this, which can be found on eNet. And we'll send the link out when we send the recording and slides out to you all. So I think we have about half of you have answered. So go ahead and keep answering that. And we'll go really quickly through the 5 accountability guiding principles. So the first one is ADRA is guided by the principles of dignity and justice, inclusiveness and participation, accountability and transparency, compassion and commitment. ADRA has 0 tolerance for any form of abuse of power, sexual exploitation, fraud and corruption, physical and psychological abuse, and criminal offenses. ADRA takes complaints seriously and positively and will address all issues of sexual exploitation, abuse of power, corruption, and breach of ADRA policies and standards. ADRA is committed to having an effective procedure for remaining accountable to affected populations. And lastly, appropriate cultural and local practices should be respected in the development of feedback and complaint mechanisms. So now Daria will close the poll and we'll launch the results. So looks like a little over half of you have said yes, and a little under half have said no. That's really great. So thank you for answering that. And again, we will send out links to that if you haven't seen it. So to whom are we accountable? So there's 3 main categories, which are beneficiaries and their communities, partners, and donors. And today, since we'll be focusing on CFRMs, it falls under being accountable to beneficiaries and their communities. And again, a reminder that all of these resources, all of the accountability to affected population resources are available on eNet to any ADRA staff. And we'll be sending the link in our follow-up email. And if you need access to eNet, we can help facilitate that for you. So Daria will now launch our next poll, which says, does your office currently have a CFRM in place? Yes or no? So you should see the question pop up on your screen. Does your office currently have a CFRM in place? Yes, no, or not sure? So while you're answering that, we'll talk a little bit about CFRMs. So what is a CFRM? This stands for Community Feedback and Response Mechanism, and it's a systematic way to collect feedback about the program. It helps us capture any complaints or issues, and it helps us to respond to the community in order to improve our programs. And you may have heard or called it by other names, such as feedback mechanism or a BFM, beneficiary feedback mechanism, complaints and response mechanism, or just a feedback and complaints mechanism. But here at ADRA, we will refer to it as a CFRM or community feedback and response mechanism. So let's go ahead and look at the results of the poll. So a little over half of you have said yes, have answered yes, and the rest have answered no or not sure. Thanks for answering that for us. Great. Let's go on. Oh, we have another poll question for you. And it says, have you ever helped set up and or design a CFRM? Yes or no? So if you've ever helped set up or design a CFRM, even if you weren't the lead, go ahead and answer that. So why are CFRMs important? So receiving feedback and complaints help us to meet beneficiaries' needs in the best way possible. Communities have the right to give us feedback and complaints on the program designed for them. CFRMs help identify and address any issues, especially the serious ones, such as fraud, corruption, PSEA. And it helps us demonstrate accountability to beneficiaries, which we will talk about in a second. And it also helps us build trust with the communities when feedback is listened to and responded to. So let's go ahead and see the results of the poll right now. So a little over of you answered yes to this question, which is really great to see. Awesome. So let's move on. So the core humanitarian standard on quality and accountability, or CHS, details 9 commitments for humanitarian and development actors to measure and improve the quality and effectiveness of their assistance. And commitment 5 says that communities and people affected by crisis have access to safe and responsive mechanisms to handle complaints. So as you can see, CFRMs are an essential part of the 9 core humanitarian standard for improved accountability in humanitarian and development programming. And you can see the performance indicators here on the screen. And ADRA is a signatory on CHS, so we need to make sure that these standards are in all of our interventions. Now we have another poll for you. So we want to know if you think you know the difference between feedback and complaints. So do you know the difference between feedback and complaints? Yes, no, maybe, but I'm not sure. So we're going to take a few seconds for you guys to respond to this, and then we'll show the results, and then we'll go on. So take a second to answer this question. And we'll give it another, oh, go ahead and share the results, Daria. Okay, great. It looks like most of you, the majority of you know the difference between feedback and complaints. That's awesome. There were a few of you that are maybe, but not sure. So we're gonna go over that right now. Let's define feedback. Feedback is information shared by beneficiaries to the organization. So this could be about thoughts, feelings, and perceptions about a product or a service. It can be positive or negative. So for example, praise about our work, suggestions to help improve a project, questions about issues like beneficiary selection, activity choices, or staff behavior. Feedback is oftentimes more informal and doesn't require a formal response and can be addressed informally during monitoring visits, although it should be shared with the program staff in these instances. But sometimes it can be formal and should have a formal response. It helps us it provides useful insights into project activities, are perceived, and how they are being implemented. And now we're going to define complaints. So complaints are more serious and formal than feedback and are negative in nature. So they can be specific grievances of anyone who has been negatively affected by an organization's action or who believes that an organization has failed to meet a stated commitment. And it can be about non-sensitive issues, such as dissatisfaction with activities, or about sensitive issues such as fraud, corruption, abusive behavior, or sexual exploitation. It can be an expression of dissatisfaction about the standard or quality of assistance being provided, or it could be related to the actions or lack of actions taken by our staff or volunteers that directly or indirectly cause anyone distress. So we want to remember that beneficiaries have the right to complain if assistance is not appropriate, relevant to their needs, not as promised, or if there's a serious breach of the ADRA Code of Conduct. So hopefully that clears up any questions you had about the differences between feedback and complaints. And in our guide, we go a little bit more into detail on that too. So now we're going to look at the 4 different levels of feedback and complaints that might be received. As you can see here on the screen, the first level is information, requests, and feedback. And this could be about the selection criteria, maybe the place and time of the distribution, suggestions of changing distribution items, or it could be simply, as we mentioned, praise about our work. The second level is minor complaints. These could be missing items from distribution packages, issues with the cash transfer or voucher, dissatisfaction with beneficiary selection process or the distribution process, or a lack of support or follow-up from our staff. The third level is major complaints. And this could be poor quality of items distributed, nepotism, discrimination, favoritism, unsafe distribution sites, theft, or verbal abuse. And the last one is sensitive complaints. And this includes corruption, misconduct, sexual harassment, exploitation and abuse, child abuse, or fraud. And just as a reminder that sensitive complaints need to be taken very, very seriously, and there should be special procedures and policies in place for this. Now I'm going to hand it over to Daria to finish up the training.
Thanks, Carrie. So I'm going to talk about the guide and how we've structured it to just take you through the main components. So we've structured it into 4 main sections. So first we talk about the planning, then the design, then implementing and managing your CFRM, and then also how to learn from your CFRM and use it to adapt programming. And I hope you've all had some time to familiarize yourselves with the guide, but if not, we'll be sharing it afterwards, and we'd encourage you to take a look through. This is going to be quite top level, given the amount of time that we have, and as Carrie mentioned, we do go through these points in more detail in the guide. So yeah, let's move on to planning. So the way in the guide, we also have lots of key questions for you to consider as you are developing your CFRM. So first, we thought you might want to explore what is the location of your CFRM. So this means which areas will your CFRM cover and what is its remit? Are you covering only one location? Or maybe if you are in a consortium or working with partners, will your CFRM also cover the areas in which they're working? So just something to think about. Are there any barriers to accessing the CFRM? So we want to make sure that it's as accessible as possible and that all beneficiaries of different disabilities and literacies and genders can also access it. So just looking at all the different types of vulnerabilities people might have and how you can make sure that your CFRM caters to that. Then the question is around management. So who is the primary person who will be responsible for managing it? Usually this falls to maybe the M&E coordinator or an accountability officer if you have these roles. But again, something to think about. And then also thinking about what your CFRM will not cover. So if beneficiaries are participating in other programs, for example, you might not wish for them to complain or give feedback to you using your CFRM. Also, any kind of community disputes probably will not fall within the scope of your CFRM. And then again, how will the feedback be used and how will you communicate it with your stakeholders? Thanks, Gary. We can go to the next slide. Oh, I think there's one. Yeah, perfect. Great. So the next question is about obtaining support from staff and management. So we know that a successful feedback mechanism starts with staff who support it fully. And the buy-in of staff and especially senior management is important to get this up and running. Also looking at delegating roles and responsibilities appropriately in relation to collecting and managing feedback. And often this falls to the M&E manager or M&E coordinator, but it's also good to have a team of people, especially field staff who are on the ground, involved in designing the CFRM to make it as relevant as possible. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So this is just emphasizing that a CFRM will only be effective if beneficiaries know that providing feedback and complaints is their right, and that if they are comfortable using the channels that you have in place. So raising awareness with them and empowering communities to use the CFRM is really important. Each project's CFRM channels might be different depending on the types of beneficiaries that you work with. And as I mentioned already, speaking with vulnerable groups is really important to mitigate any barriers that they might establish, that might prevent them from giving feedback. And then finally, local partners need to be aware and understand the scope and the purpose of your CFRM, because also if, for example, if they are implementing in areas where you aren't, you also want to make sure you're collecting feedback from there as well, so that there are no gaps left. So if we move on to the design, I think we have a poll here. Again, I think one more poll for you. So this is just looking at different examples of informal and formal methods, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So please answer kind of this question that comes up, which says, in your experience, which channels are the most successful for collecting feedback and complaints? And we ask you to choose the top 2. So don't choose more than 2. And we have informal face-to-face conversations, suggestion boxes, phone hotlines or SMS, community committees or meetings, help desk, focus group discussions, or radio. So we'll just give it a few more seconds to respond to this poll, and then we'll see what the answers say. Okay, looks like face-to-face conversations is in the lead at the moment. Let's see. No one's found radio to be helpful. Okay. Okay, perfect. So yes, so we have all of these channels as options. As we see, face-to-face conversations seem to be the most successful, followed by community committees or meetings. And then phone hotlines, suggestion boxes kind of tied, and help desks and radio not as successful. So it would be interesting actually to hear in the chat if you could maybe type some of your experiences or reasons as to why you think that the channels you've chosen work most effectively. Oh, in terms of the radio, oh, I don't know. I think there are some projects that have used kind of radio for collecting feedback. So I think these could be different channels that you use to collect feedback, or different kind of messaging that people can then share. So if you have any experiences of using radio as well, it would be good to hear those in the chat. Oh, I can see some messages coming in. Email and social media also being channels. Yes, that's very true. Also good channels for collecting feedback. Okay, let's move on. So the next slide, Carrie, thank you. If we can, so the next slide is just about looking at how to build inclusive CFRMs. So I touched on this briefly before, but we want to be aware of our beneficiaries' needs, especially those with different types of vulnerabilities. So we've highlighted here a few things to consider, but this is not an exhaustive list. So you'll probably have examples of other ways as well to be to build inclusive CFRMs. But for example, with disabilities, so just make considerations for those people who might not have the same, might have different access needs, and hold community meetings in spaces that are accessible and where they are able to attend. For literacy, of course, there need to be different channels considered for communities with lower literacy levels, including also children. So thinking about child-friendly CFRMs and how children can provide feedback in a comfortable way. Then looking at socioeconomic status. So making sure that all groups of different socioeconomic status have equal access. Time, arranging for community meetings to be held at a time where everybody can attend, especially women and other people who might have additional duties. And then gender. So in some cultures, men and women might not be comfortable giving feedback in the same space, or may not be allowed to meet in the same area. So also having women, if possible, as part of the feedback team, or as an option for them, to people to provide feedback to them, might be helpful in breaking that barrier. Of course, with technology, again, just making sure that everybody has equal access to the channels you're proposing. And with location, making sure that the CFRM channel, if it's a help desk or if it's a suggestion box, that it's in a safe space and it's accessible for people, especially those who live in remote areas. With ethnic groups, in some contexts, ethnic identity might be a source of conflict. So consider having a diverse team that aims to represent all affected groups. And finally, language. Ensure your CFRM caters for all different languages and dialects spoken in the community, so that anybody who wishes to provide feedback has a way to do so. Okay, so this is just about closing the loop. So this is emphasizing that it's important when we take action to make our beneficiaries or communities aware of the action that we've taken in response to the feedback. So the loop starts with this green arrow to the left. So when the beneficiary starts, or beneficiary is aware of the CFRM and would like to give feedback, they give the feedback is received and acknowledged, also recorded, making sure that all the key points are documented to ensure transparency and making sure that we know how to deal with a case in the right way. And then once the resolution is decided, just making sure that is fed back to the beneficiary or the person giving the report to make sure that they are aware. And this is also a way as well of building trust with the communities and the beneficiaries, to make sure that if they complain or if they give feedback on a small issue, giving a quick response will show that we're serious about it and will hopefully build that trust so they can report more serious issues as well. And in terms of responding, you may have seen this before. So this is taken from the SOP for the CFRM, which is also available on ENET. It's one of the resources that Kerry mentioned earlier. Different responses or different types of complaints and feedback will require different responses. So in the SOP guide, they highlight fraud, safeguarding, and programs. And minor complaints will require different responses and different people responding from major and sensitive complaints. So you can look at this SOP guide and use it to develop your own if you don't already have one. It outlines the different kind of response mechanisms in quite a lot of detail. But this table just shows the different types of timelines for responding to complaints of different severity, and then also who are the key people that should be involved, and whether there need to be any investigation committees set up as well. Of course, this will differ from project to project, so it's your template, but you can adapt it. Okay, so when it comes to implementing and managing it, the first thing is around raising awareness in the community and trying to reassure community members that giving feedback is a positive thing, and that they have a right to give feedback. So it's important to provide the clear messaging on the purpose of the CFRM, that, for example, it won't necessarily mean if they give feedback that they won't be involved in any programs in the future, but really trying to reinforce that positive messaging. also how to access the CFRM, how to use it, and how they can expect to receive feedback. Okay, so once you have done all the design and the planning and the thinking about your scope of the CFRM, which channels you're using, what is its purpose, it's really important to test the system. And I think most CFRMs will need a bit of adjustment once you've done a pilot, and will need probably constant adjustment as to the whole course of when it's running. So we've given a few points here that you might wish to consider when setting up your pilot. So again, thinking about the importance of language, translating any signs or posters into local languages so all communities who wish to give feedback can. Consulting the community about the best place to put suggestion boxes or when to hold community meetings. Being inclusive, making sure that anybody who would like to access your mechanism can. And it's important to point out as well that you probably won't get feedback immediately, but through encouraging the communities and raising awareness and making the channels clear, hopefully over time, the community will give feedback both on minor complaints, but also on more serious things. And that will help us adapt kind of the programming to make it better. So moving on to the final part of the guide, which looks at learning and adaptation. So this is just an example which we've taken from the guide of a complaints tracking tool. And you may have a similar system in place already, but if not, you can go to the guide and you can see this table, which tells you all the different things that you will, all the different kind of areas that you need to note down when recording a complaint. So it's quite small in here, but in the guide, it is a bit bigger and it's longer as well. So you can use this to track anything that comes in. Also, it's important to note as well around data protection and privacy, and that the only people who are managing the complaints log, for example, should have access to it. Maybe think about having a password protected file, or just making sure those channels are really clear in your office so that not everybody can access it, especially if there are sensitive complaints in there as well. So when monitoring and analyzing your feedback, as I've mentioned already, make sure that everything is recorded, even informal conversations that you have with beneficiaries where they give feedback, because it's always good learning. Making sure that data is disaggregated. So we have the 3 different levels, so minor, major, and sensitive, but also you can disaggregate it by demographic variables if you would like to, and then also issues that are really urgent or issues that will be addressed maybe through changing the program a little bit, and that may, you can respond to a little bit later. As well, sharing feedback with management is really important as well, and making sure that this is done in a clear and concise way. Also, just to point out, I think we had this on another slide, maybe somewhere else, that any PSCA related complaints really should go to the country director within 24 hours. So if there's anything really sensitive or major, that needs to go to senior management immediately, really. And then, as I just mentioned, it's very good practice to anonymize a database, making sure that it's protected and that not everybody can access it, but only those who need to know what is in there. Okay, and then in terms of learning and adapting, so looking for trends and patterns in the data. So, I have 80% of beneficiaries said that they are unhappy with a particular type of food that they are receiving or a particular non-food item. That would mean that, possibly it's time to change that. But also looking at the root of the issue. So maybe doing a bit of analysis into the feedback and why certain things are coming up. Point 3 is just around, as I said, constantly piloting and reassessing the CFRM to make sure that all the members of the community and whoever would like to use it can use it. And maybe if there is not much feedback coming in, thinking about how to raise that awareness and potentially trying different routes to do that. And as always, making sure to build those community relationships and consult them on the CFRM to see how it can be more effective. Oh, and there's a poll that's come up. So have you used any feedback from your CFRM to change your programming? So it would be great to hear this. And then also, if you can, to give in any examples in the chat, that would be great as well, to see how you've used that feedback and how which adaptations you've made. So we'll just have a few more seconds when you can finish answering this poll. Okay, great. So, okay, almost 70% of you have used feedback to change your programming. That's great to hear. And yes, if you have any specific examples that you wish to share in the chat, please do so. Okay. And then we have learning from other CFRMs. So perhaps you have different CFRMs for different projects. Perhaps you are working with different partners who also have CFRMs, or you are in a learning forum or exchange with other NGOs. It's always great to learn from other examples and see how things are working in the field and how different NGOs are using, which methods they're using that are effective. So that's really always something to capitalize on. And then also thinking about if you're doing a program in a consortium or in an area where there's lots of stakeholders working, are there any ways to create joint channels to reduce duplication, to make it easier for communities to report, and thinking about ways to explore that. So that's also something to think about. Okay, and then finally, this is a very brief overview of everything we've just covered. So to ensure that your CFRM processes and responsibilities are clear, just think about how will the feedback and complaints be collected? Who will receive the feedback and complaints? How will they be processed? And how will they be used? And then how will your project respond to feedback and complaints, and who will be responsible for that? So I think that was a very whistle-stop tour through the guide. But as Carrie mentioned, we have all of these resources that are available on eNet. So please do look at them. And if you have any questions at any point, feel free to reach out. We are happy to take questions now, but also after the webinar. Feel free to email us when you have looked at these. And also we'd love to hear examples of how you're using these documents and whether they're helpful, whether they need to be adapted, because really we want them to be as practical as possible and as useful for the network. So if you do have any feedback on the documents, please share it with us. Great, I'm now going to hand back over to Kerry for the next section of the webinar.
Thanks so much, Daria. I'm going to stop sharing that particular PowerPoint, and we're going to switch over to our case studies, which we're very excited about. Our first case study will be brought to us by ADRA Fiji, by Christine, and let me just get the sharing. Hopefully you all can see that now. And as we said, that was just a very short training. We didn't cover everything. There's more points in the guide. Hopefully you guys will be able to look at that. And if you do have any questions about anything that wasn't covered during that training, please put it in the chat. Liliana and David will be collecting those, and we'll try to answer as many as we can in the question and answer session. Now, as we go through the case studies, if you have any questions for any of these offices, please put them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end during the question and answer session. So if you, for instance, if you have a question for Christine and ADRA Fiji, just note that it's particularly for her and et cetera for any of our other case studies. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Christine.
Thank you, Carrie. If you're able to just go on the next slide. So the case study is about a recent cash and voucher response program, which is funded under UNDP through Department of Foreign Affairs Trade with the title of Pacific Resilient Sustainable Development Support. It's a low value grant. Under this response project, we partnered with a government ministry, which is looks after the local native interests, namely the Itauki Affairs Board, responding to our recent tropical cyclone TC Harold from 2019 to 2020. Under the project, there's two components. One is on debris and waste management for early recovery and rehabilitation, and the second is around cash programming through livelihood support, also addressing food security. Sorry, Carrie, just go back. So that's just a picture of one of the maritime islands where a beneficiary is receiving the cash assistance through cash in envelope. Next, Carrie, please. So for the CFRM channels used, prior to the cash assistance, we conducted community consultations. And this is conducted using the local and also local language and the specific dialects to the districts that were affected. We used banners, both in English and also in the local language. On the banners, we had focal points of ADRA and also our government counterparts for easy access from the beneficiaries with specific context. With the community consultations, we also use the existing structures to address issues of access by women. I've put there, it's called Soko Soko Vakamarama, where women's group who usually meet regularly, and they can address the issues around women, which is then raised through community or village meetings, namely in the local language, it's called Mboseva Koro. Similarly with the youth and the men's group, so they have those small groups that they meet to raise their specific issues, which can then be raised at the community or village meetings. For each of the communities, we have the Turanginikoro, or the village headsman or spokesperson. For any entry to the village or the exit, you will need to engage the Turanginikoro. Those are just some pictures of the community consultations prior to the cash distribution, and also our monitoring officer with the TNK of two of the communities conducting post-distribution monitoring and just getting direct feedback on how the response project was. Carrie, if we can go on to the next slide. So this is just an example of the banner that was used as the information for the community feedback mechanism, both in English and also in the local language. Yep. So that's briefly on what we used in our project, Carrie. Thank you. And for any further context, our program directors context, Anna and myself.
Thanks so much, Christine. And now we will turn it over to Kabir at Azure Nepal.
Yeah, thank you, Kerry. Namaste, everyone. This is Kabir Ratna Stapit from ADRA Nepal, currently as an acting team leader. I am working there. And I'm going to present the CFRM case of our regular development project. The name is Generating Opportunities in Agriculture and Livelihood. It's second phase and is funded by Australian government through DFAT and ADRA Australia. The length of project is 5 years, starting from 1st July 2019. And this is basically a livelihood enhancement project where we empower women and increase income of poor and vulnerable people of 2 local government from 2 districts. And basically through resilient and market-led livelihood options, business development services, leadership development, and promotion of gender equality. Next slide, please. So in regards to CFRM, we basically the complaint handling policy was developed on 2017. Before that, we had child protection policy, which was developed in 2008. So we have been working, initiating the CFRM very much from after the formation of this policy. Initially, we had suggestion boxes placed and a dedicated email placed in publications and banners. So we placed a suggestion box in communities as well as in our project offices. But what we find later on through community consultation was suggestion boxes and was not so accessible. Even the email address, basically because of low literacy in the project area, was not so accessible. So in 2020, we managed to get a toll-free number, and it's been just a year since we get that number. And also beyond that, we have developed a PSCH policy also in 2020, and various community awareness workshops and trainings, especially to staffs, were done. And to raise the awareness of the CFRM, we have been placing this toll-free number as well as email address in every banners and publications, so it's visible to everyone who are participating in the events. Beside that, we have also developed posters with illustrations, basically for PSCH cases, as well as for complaint registration cases. In that, we have demonstrated all the channels of these CFRM. So we are still working hard to get this information to community. So we have initiated with this project, and we are trying to expand it to other projects as well. So next slide, please. So actually, in case of Nepal, we are an INGO, and as per government policy, we cannot directly implement activities at the field level. So what we do is we partner with local district partners, so in this case, it's Federal Nepal and Red Cross Nepal for field level of intervention. And we provide them technical support for development and update of CFRM policy. This is ongoing in case of the these current partners. However, we are demonstrating, disseminating our communication channels to the beneficiaries right now, but in later days, we are also planning to have CFRM policy developed in of partners also, which will help the beneficiary to have both choices. So yeah, basically project partners and staffs are involved in awareness raising and orientation in community, as well as facilitating CFRM initiatives. These include orientation verbally, consultations, as well as disseminating these posters and publications. So next slide, please. Yeah, definitely there has been challenges in implementing CFRM, as Daria mentioned. Like still we are in the piloting phase, so we have just kicked on regard to toll-free numbers for these specific projects. Yeah, definitely more awareness is needed. We need to be more exhaustive in this manner, and another challenge that we face is basically we have like focal persons handling different type of complaint. For example, we have PSCH focal person, and for the complaint and feedback, we have M&E coordinator. So depending upon the cases, the feedback or complaint is diverted. And basically for PSCP complaints, sometimes it's a very sensitive issue, so it needs to be handled well. So the training might be needed in case of those sort of challenges. And yeah, also there is different cases coming through one channel. So that's also like whether we keep a single toll-free number or different toll-free number is also something that is on discussion. And yeah, adaptation, we have also like now integrated the feedback questionnaires, because we usually conduct annual monitoring survey in every projects as well as evaluation. So we have placed questionnaires on every those type of survey and evaluation. That is more of a demand, like supply side. We try to get feedback from that. And yeah, CFRM needs to be integrated in all the projects after we see the good feedback from the existing project. So next slide, please. So this is just some of the pictures I would like to show. Basically, what is in the topmost left part of the photo is a complaint system channels mentioned there. So we have tried to place different channels in a poster, and it is usually sticker type. So it is placed in the place where the events happen. And just below that is a banner, and it's not so visible, but like it's a big banner. So at the bottom we have placed a toll-free number. It's all in Nepali local language. And to the right, this is related to PSCH this dissemination. So we have tried to make an illustration on how what are the PSCH issues and how it can be reported, so that those who cannot who are illiterate also can see the picture and make the communication. So these are some practices that we have been doing. So yeah, also we the left one is a calendar, and at the bottom we have placed the feedback, this toll-free number as well. And also we have been practicing, which is very common, is that for every event we do the public audit type of thing, where we say the budget and the expenses, as well as verbal feedback is also collected during that time. Now we are starting to practice to keep the suggestion boxes in every training events as well. So thank you. If you have any queries, I would be happy to answer. My name is there, and email is displayed there. Yeah, thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much, Kabir. And now we'll move on to ADRA Zimbabwe with Josephat.
Thank you, Kerry. If you can go to the next slide. My name is Josephat Kuchikauripo. So in 2013 to 2016, ADRA Zimbabwe implemented a project that aimed at improving maternal health for women in one of the remote districts in Zimbabwe. This was funded by the UK aid. The project was mainly focusing on improving healthcare services to about 7,500 women of childbearing age through the construction of maternal health facilities, followed by enhancing service delivery of the healthcare providers. It also included increasing community awareness on the health risks and services, especially associated with home deliveries. And lastly, it was also increasing women's utilization of the services that were provided at the health facilities. Next slide, please. So as part of the implementation process, the feedback mechanism employed in this project involved consultation with the communities where the stakeholders, including the communities, agreed on a set of feedback mechanisms and also agreed on where these were to be positioned within the community and even at health institutions. This was followed by establishment of an agreed referral system where the feedback would then be relayed from the community to ADRA, to other stakeholders, and back to the community with the results of the analysis that would have been done. This was also followed, was then followed by the collection of the feedback, its validation, investigation, and then once a conclusion has been reached, this would then be communicated to the communities and the consensus reached on the way forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so after the consultations, it was agreed that the project was going to use what we termed predetermined questions. So we had specific issues, specific areas that we wanted to gather information on. So we would then craft questions around the issues so that the communities will specifically give feedback based on the questions that they would have been asked. For instance, you would be asking about satisfaction with regards to certain interventions. For example, if you build a waiting mother's shelter, you would then go to the community and ask them on the satisfaction based on how they are utilizing the waiting mother's shelter. If it says satisfaction about services provided by the health facility, you would also craft questions around that and gather the feedback. It was agreed feedback boxes or community meetings. These were face-to-face meetings with the community. Notice boards or information boards were also erected in the community and at specific sites. Focus group discussions, key informant interviews, as well as the KIIs. And whenever we had a community gathering, we would also place a feedback desk or a help desk on that day so that people who had issues that they needed to be addressed would be instantly addressed on the day. And then in addition, this particular intervention had a stand-alone community feedback officer who was responsible for the collection of the feedback, analysis, and then relaying it to the relevant stakeholders as well as to the community. So in the implementation of this project, we agreed with the community that we would set up a committee that would comprise of a health person from the health clinic. You would also have some committee members from the community. And from the community, you'd also have a community leader representative. And they would be constituting that committee, which would then agree on the dates and intervals at which they would open the feedback box and then refer the necessary feedback to the necessary people that would need to act on. It was also observed that help desk and community meetings were ideal in this case because they would provide instant responses to whatever feedback was there. But as you would note, it also required that you we would need a full-time staff person who would be looking at those issues and interacting with the communities. Let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, so in the process, we then realized that there were issues that were coming in which allowed adjustment of certain things within the project to allow for implementation and further rollout of the interventions. For instance, there were issues to do with the lack of food at the waiting mother shelters. As they were waiting, people started complaining that they had no food. So we contacted the supporting office so that at least a program would be arranged to come and assist the mothers who were waiting with food. There were also conflicts that emanated as a result of sharing of bicycles within the project. So the community health workers who were trained were given bicycles so that they would ease mobility within the communities. But upon engaging the stakeholders through this system, we realized that the stakeholders needed us to provide quality bicycles. But again, because of the limitations in the budget, we could not buy the quality bicycles to meet all the numbers that we were training. So we ended up reaching a compromise where we then paid the village health workers. But that paying process ended up conflicting with certain customs of the communities, and hence we ended up reducing the numbers so that we would at least balance out on meeting quality, as well as also trying to ensure that we don't continue to compromise the customs. We developed a frequently asked questions document that assisted us to continue to gather what the community felt, and we also provided feedback and giving answers to the questions. Because we also engaged with the communities and we're building interest within the communities, as people came to wait at the waiting mothers shelters, we then realized that some were being referred to the main hospital, but there were challenges now at the main hospital that needed further interventions. This led to us engaging the supporting office again, who managed to allow us to adjust the budget to include support at the main district hospital so that whoever was being referred from the clinics would be attended to at the main hospital. Can we move to the next slide? Okay, so these are some of the pictures. The guy that you see on the top left corner there is the feedback officer, and the board there is the feedback box, the feedback board, and then below it in blue is the box that we were using, and these were placed at strategic positions within the communities. And those are mothers waiting for a focus group discussion with the community feedback officer. Next slide, please. Okay, so in case you need any further clarifications with regards to this, you can contact myself on the given Skype, WhatsApp, or email addresses that you see there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Now we're going to move on to ADRA Uganda with Harriet.
Thank you very much, Kerry. ADRA Uganda, I'm presenting the case story from ADRA Uganda. Go to another slide. Yes, ADRA Uganda is currently implementing a project called General Food and Cash Assistance. This project is being funded by WFP. It started in 2019 and it will be ending 2023. And it is being implemented in the 2 settlements in the Western Uganda, that is Wamanja and Chaka refugee settlement. The main objective of the project is focusing on the increasing availability and accessibility of food to refugees, as well as building their resilience to the affected communities. You can go on, okay. ADRA Uganda, during the design phase, involved the communities on how best we can get feedback from them. And these are some of the suggestions that we got, and these are some of the channels they preferred. One was suggestion box. The second one was logbook. Third one are physical complaint desks, then reflection meetings, post-distribution meetings, and pre-address during the distribution, then emails. These channels, they are not basically for only emergency, but they are also being implemented in other development projects in Uganda. You can see the picture of a suggestion box here. This is where we normally, some of the communities normally use the suggestion boxes. And when it comes to the opening of the suggestion box, we have to make sure that we get community members that represent the community on a monthly basis to open their suggestion boxes. And below are some of the pictures. The first one, this is the complaint desk normally at the distribution center. Then the second one, this is the gathering post-distribution meeting. These are reflection meetings being conducted at the implementation area. You can go through. Another slide. Yes, this is the design phase where we engaged the community. You see up there, we have very many, go back please, it's okay. So we have very many channels, but when we asked the community why we should put very many platforms, these are some of the reasons they gave us. They said that multiple feedback can help them to capture very many complaints and with different category of groups. For instance, those who are low literacy, they are able to use reflection meetings. And we also looked at people who cannot speak in the public meetings. We also looked at the females. You know, some of the females in Africa, it is very difficult for them to express their feeling in the community. So that's why we also thought of having different channels. We also thought of having different channels due to sensitive complaints that cannot be discussed in the community, in the public gatherings. Also, we also thought of maybe if we can have a complaints desk, like a mobile desk, we can be able to answer some of the questions immediately, and we give responses. Next slide, please. This is the flow chart of ADRA Uganda, how we normally handle our complaints and how we normally capture them. First of all, we receive complaints from our communities through different channels, as I have explained up. Then these complaints, we have people who are trained, including M&E and complaints assistant. They record the complaints. After recording the complaints, they analyze to see whether the complaint can be solved at that moment. If the complaint can be solved at that moment, the team, they normally solve the complaint, then we close the case. If the complaint cannot be solved, we consult or we first report to the project manager or coordinator for further guidance before we refer the complaint to the next partner. Then after referring the complaint, we make sure we continue following the complaint until it is fully addressed. Then we enter into the system and we close the case. We continue learning from there. but these are some of the cases, the non-sensitive complaints that we normally receive. This is basically in the emergency where this project is being implemented. For instance, poor quality of food items, change in the implementation, time management for staff, but we also use the same flowchart in the development area. We can go to another slide. This is the flowchart of sensitive complaints, and this is very, it is a big chart because these complaints are very sensitive. If I say sensitive complaints, I mean corruption, I mean sexual harassment, I mean staff behavior, name it. What we normally do here, again, we use the same channels of complaints I have explained up, but those ones specifically, they go straight to the project manager or coordinator. Then the project manager normally reports to the country director within 24 hours after receiving the complaints. Then after that, the country director notifies ADRA Africa and ADRA International, as well as the donor. Then at ADRA level, we have a case management committee where we normally sit and analyze the complaint that we have received. From there, we first ask ourselves, is this complaint, is it in our mandate to be investigated? If we say that the complaint can be investigated and we have a basis, we go ahead. And if we see that the complaint cannot be investigated, we close the case and we inform the complainant. If we investigate the complaint, we first ask ourselves again, is this complaint, is it within our mandate? Do we have a basis to investigate? If we don't have any mandate, we refer the case and we follow case management. Then we alert or inform ADRA International, ADRA Afro, and our donor. If we go to investigate case management in Uganda in collaboration with ADRA International, as well as the donor, they come up with the terms of reference that will guide the team that will go on ground to conduct the investigation. And the terms of reference should be clear, so that the team can understand exactly what they are going to investigate on. Then after that, the team on ground are supposed to submit the report within 24 hours. Then the CD, the management committee, the investigation committee, and the case management committee sits down, analyze the report. Then from there, they share with the donor, they share with ADRA Africa, they also share with the board members on the committee. If the case is on finance, we share with finance committee on the board. If the case is on HR, we share with HR committee on the board before we get any clearance. Then after that, we provide feedback to the complainants. After providing feedback to the complainant, if the person is not comfortable with the results, we can go ahead and investigate. But if a person is okay with the decision, we close and we continue learning from there. But this report is supposed to be shared within 21 days, and the complainant is supposed to give feedback within 30 days. After that, we alert our donor on what came out of the investigation. And if the donor accepts the investigation report, we close the case and we keep learning from there. The keynote to take on this diagram is confidentiality is the key. Confidentiality is the key in whatever you do in all complaints. Let it be non-sensitive, let it be sensitive. Confidentiality is the key. This is what I can share from Uganda. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Harriet. And this is, yeah, go ahead, Harriet.
Yes, I wanted to say that these are some of the contacts. One is Charles. This is our CD country director, in case you want to get any information or more clarification on the chat. The second one is Harriet Tonjirwe. This is our MEAL manager. The third one is Kemba's Eunice. This one is our internal auditor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harriet, and thank you so much to our presenters. That was really great, and I learned a lot of what's going on in our Azure network. Now we're going to move over to our question and answer session. And if you have asked any questions, we've written them down. Daria, are there any questions that we can ask our presenters, or any other questions that we can answer right now?
Sure, so some of the questions have already been answered in the chat, but I think one question for Josat to clarify, you mentioned about, I think, traditional and community customs. What specifically did you mean when you talked about that? I think it was the slide when you were talking about adaptation and adapting your CFRM.
Okay. Thank you, Daria. I tried to respond directly to Karen, but anyway, so what was happening with the pairing of bicycles was that you would pair based on proximity to each other within the community, and what ended up happening was a situation where you would pair married people, a male and a female, in the community. And now that when the people were now seeing these people constantly talking to each other, sharing bicycles, it was now against what the community usually does, where if you want an asset, to borrow an asset from a household, you have to go through the head of the household, who is the man. But in this case, the bicycle has been given to a lady, and you are going direct to the lady. It conflicted now with how they usually do their borrowings within the community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and then we have a question from Susan. Oh, I'm not sure who to direct this to. Maybe, not sure. So the question reads, how can we ensure that the CFRMs are really functional, involving the bulk of the communities utilizing them, and are sustainable? So sustainability of CFRMs. Any of the presenters, would you like to answer that?
Okay, maybe I could take that. I think from my perspective, sustainability of the CFRMs depends on the consultations that would have been done. It should involve everyone concerned with the project, the community, the local stakeholders, and even the government counterparts, all coming together to agree on how they are going to be sharing their concerns, sharing their successes, and then agreeing on the channels that they are going to use to reach to a consensus on how to resolve certain issues that might be conflicting as they implement certain activities within the community. So as long as there is no consensus from the stakeholders, participation is bound to fail, and the feedback mechanism is also going to fail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josvat. Any of the other presenters, do you have any thoughts on the sustainability of CFRMs?
Yeah, this is Kabir. Yeah, basically, when we talk about community feedback, the awareness is the major thing that we should be doing. Basically, we should aware them on the reporting mechanism and, if needed, the confidentiality of information that will be forwarded, and how the reporting system works. Those sort of information should be provided to communities. So this can also help in regular feedbacks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kabir. Okay, there's one question from Telma to Harriet. So Telma is wondering how many staff members work on the feedback mechanism in your case study, in the example of ADRA Uganda.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. At field level, we have one M&E, and we have 2 trained complaints and handling staff. So basically at field level, we have 3 people.
Great. Thank you. I hope that helps, Telma. Great.
Daddy.
Yes.
It's Telma here. Could I just add that to that question that we tried the rotors for collecting the feedbacks, because we thought at the beginning that one person, it would be too much for one member of staff to be doing that all the time for the whole project. We tried that and it didn't work very well. And then we went back to one person and now we have 2. So I'm just wondering if others have experiences of that and how they dealt with it. Thank you.
Thanks, Telma. If anybody else has an experience, feel free to share that in the chat or share it with us afterwards. I think also we will, maybe it's premature to talk about HumHub, but we have a community of practice, I'll just say it now, we have a community of practice on HumHub, and we'll share the link in a second. And it would be great to continue this conversation on there. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, it would be really great to share our experiences and continue the learning exchange. Okay, we have one more question for Harriet, for you. How did you ensure that the CFRM system is inclusive?
Thank you very much for that good question. Yes, as I have said, during the design phase, we had to conduct an assessment where we engaged all the key stakeholders, and it was participatory. We tried also involve, we tried to do separate different focus group discussion so that we can make sure that we get all responses from different categories, from boys, girls, women, and boys. And it is working very well. Yes. And at country level, we have a committee, case management committee, and it is working very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet. Great. There was one question that was asked earlier, and I know Liliana responded to it in the chat, but I think it's important to go back to this. So Prabhak asked, what does the feedback loop look like with the complaint from an anonymous source? So of course, if you don't know where the complaint comes from, it's hard to respond to that person to show that you have resolved the complaint. So in some cases, if it comes maybe through an email, that might be anonymous, there's a way to do that. But I'm just wondering if anybody has any experiences that you want to share in the chat about anonymous complaints and resolving those. And also if any of our presenters have any experiences with anonymous complaints and responding to them.
I think we actually touch on this a little bit in the guide. And if it's a community issue, one of the things that we've seen that works is posting the answer, on a community forum or a board or having a community meeting to respond to it. So even though it's an anonymous question, it can be the answer, the response can be given to the community in different ways. But yeah, I am very interested to see if any of our presenters have had experience with responding to anonymous complaints.
Okay, Kerry, if I may come in.
Go ahead.
Okay, so yes, like you were saying, sometimes it's anonymous, but would be very valid. So in our case, what we would do is we would post a response on the notice boards that I talked about, addressing the issue that would have been asked or raised by the anonymous person. And that also led us to also developing what I also described as the frequently asked questions. So you would have the anonymous persons coming in maybe with the same issue or over a repeated period of times. So you would now develop those frequently asked questions that you would then share on the notice boards, and also you would come up with some flyers that we share with the communities during our meetings. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Josephat. And I think we have a little bit more time for one or two more questions. Daria, go ahead.
Sure. So there's one question from Claudio, which said, so Claudio would be interested in knowing the level of use for each mechanism and the challenges related to each, especially the help desk, suggestion boxes, and hotlines, especially how these were used by both men and women. So maybe we can just hear very briefly from each of the presenters. So in terms of your mechanisms, which had the most uptake, and then how, what was the use by men and women? Were they mostly used by men or mostly used by women? And anything else in relation to that? So maybe Christine, is Christine still with us? I know it's really late for her, but if Christine is still here, maybe we can start with you.
Hi, Kerry. Sorry, I didn't hear the last bit.
Okay, so it's around what was the most successful mechanism in your experience, and then also in relation to the use between men and women, so disaggregated, were there more men or women using the mechanism?
So for us, the banners have worked so far because it gets left behind at each of the community halls, or the same information on the banner is like we provide the leaflets. So they're able to call up, text, but some just use social media. And then we would respond to the feedback and the complaints. Having suggestion box doesn't really work at the community context for us, because even just someone being seen to put something in the suggestion box is very intimidating. Yeah.
And Christine, do you have the information on disaggregating this by men and women, or if you don't, that's fine?
Overall, for response projects, males, but we've had females, the elderly who've provided feedback and complaints on the distribution, on the information provided by the community leaders. Yeah, for disaggregated data, we've had a lot of feedback from males, but we've received complaints from females.
Thanks, Christine. Great. Okay. The other presenters, we are running out of time, unfortunately, but if you could answer the same question in 30 seconds, is that okay? Harriet, maybe we can go to you.
Yes, please, I can do that. In our case, women prefer physical help desk because they fear to express their feelings in the public. Then when it comes to men, for them, they like reflection meetings and post-distribution meetings. For them, they have that freedom to express whatever they want in the public. Then when it comes to suggestion boxes, emails, this one basically is for the youth. And for, again, log books, again, these are women. For them, they like privacy. So basically, all the channels are being used.
Great,
you.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you so much. Okay, Kabir?
In case of different channel, in our case also, suggestion boxes are definitely not working well. Basically, those are placed in few sites in the project area. However, the suggestion box placed in training venues and distribution center, there is some feedbacks provided there. So yeah, visually the feedbacks are depending upon the sensitivity. If it is of requirement for all, then it is displayed. It is the solution it is read out on the same spot. And regarding the use of different channels by men and women, especially in distribution relief, men are vocal, big vocal. But for the women, we have also like basically field staff and even gender focal persons are there. And we also have developed a community-based women activist. So with them, usually the complaints or feedbacks are provided by women. Thank you.
Thanks, Kabir. Great. And finally, Josephat. Josephat, are you still here? Okay, never mind. Maybe he can share his response in writing, and then we can send it out with the questions. Great. I think as we are just over time, I will hand over to David. Thank you very much to all our participants. Yeah.
All right, so it's time to wrap up, everybody. So a big, huge thanks to our presenters today. Yeah, I'll say I really enjoyed the presentations, especially the pictures showing how all the different instances of how we're doing CFRM across the network. It really enriches my experience, and I learn from it a lot. And I would, love to see similar things from everybody who's attending the webinar today, to see pictures from and testimonies from what all you guys are doing. Speaking about that, we do have a platform where we can share with each other on how we do CFRM and how we do all kinds of other MEAL things as well. If you haven't heard about it already, Daria mentioned it already for me, thank you. HumHub, humhub.adra.cloud. And we would love for you to sign up for that. And I would really just personally invite you to just take a picture or two of what your CFRM mechanisms are. Throw that up there, give us a little bit of an explanation about what you guys are doing. I think we could all really learn from that and have a better, well-rounded experience about what is going on in the network. We'd also like to take a moment to ask you to fill out a survey for us. I believe that Carrie will put that into the chat now. This is just to help us to learn a little bit about how to do a little bit better in these webinars. If you would like to see something a little bit different next time, that's your opportunity to do so. And as mentioned earlier, we will be sending out the recordings and the PowerPoints as well for all the presentations today. So you should be receiving that very soon via email. If you have any questions or something doesn't work, or if you don't receive an email, please feel free to reach out to Carrie Mao or Daria. Their emails, I guess, are not in the presentation, but they will be coming in the chat, I suppose. And again, just a huge thanks to our presenters for all the presentations, for taking the time to enrich all of our experiences today. And thank you for everybody who has attended. And we look forward to connecting with you on future webinars and hopefully on HumHub as well. Thank you. Have a great morning, have a great afternoon, or a great evening, depending where you are. Have a great day. Thanks.